Does anybody remember the time before caller ID? Ah, ha, ha, ha. I knew I would hear the wave of murmuring going across. Yeah, we remember the days before caller ID, don't we? When you actually had to pick up the phone to know who was calling from the other end. It was awful. It was the dark ages. It was just plain terrible. I hated not knowing who was calling at the other end. What an amazing thing when caller ID came about. I remember how long my parents resisted getting it because it was an added charge onto your phone bill. And you had to upgrade your phone to have one that displayed the caller ID. It was terrible. Sometimes, to screen calls, you just let the person leave a message. Of course, then you had to listen to minutes-long messages just to get to the real point of what they wanted. Voicemail. Come on, really? The dark ages those were. Now, with cell phones, obviously it's a lot easier, right? Somebody's calling you, you pick up your phone, you go, I don't want to talk to that person. And you put it right back down, and you put it in your pocket again. Not that I've ever done that to any of you. I want you to know that. I pick up my phone, though, and if I don't recognize the number, or especially, if it's a local number, I'll pick it up. But if it's outside of the area, I don't bother. They can leave a message if they really want me. Or, better yet, just text me. I don't want to talk to you anyway. Just send me a text, and then I can deal with you over text messaging. I know some of you are thinking, wow, what a millennial. I mean, come on, just talk to the person already. Well, you just don't understand me, okay? That's all I'm going to say. We're going to leave it at that. Sometimes, though, I want to be unreachable. Anybody else ever feel like that? Sometimes you just want to be unreachable. Sometimes you don't want to have to answer the phone. And so you do screen calls. You do look at your phone and go, I really don't have it in me to deal with this person right now, because I know that this phone call, what should be 2 minutes, is going to turn into 45 minutes, and I just don't have it in me to deal with it right now. Or I really am leaving the house and I'm on my way somewhere. I just don't have the time. I will call this person back. Sometimes we want to be unreachable. We want to screen calls. The truth is, this is my version of running away, of not being bothered by people, of running away from them. In the story of Jonah, what do we see happening? Jonah's screening God's calls. He's picking up the phone and going, oh gosh, that's God again. I'm going to put that away for a while. I'll deal with it later. And he runs the other way. This is my version of screening God's calls. Jonah is making himself unavailable. He recognizes God's number. He sees it on the caller ID. And he just ignores it. I can't deal with this right now. He might even listen to the voicemail. But he ignores that as well. This story this week that we're about to read, that hopefully you got to read this week, is so full of lessons. But we're going to hit on a few, and hopefully they speak to you this morning. So let's read from Jonah and see what we can learn from it, okay? We're going to read quite a bit, because there's just so much packed in and so much good here. And if you didn't have a chance to read, this is your chance to read together as a church. So let's begin in Jonah chapter 1, verse 1. The word of the Lord. The Lord gave this message to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. Announce my judgment against it, because I have seen how wicked its people are. But Jonah got up and went in the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. He went down to the port of Joppa, where he found a ship leaving for Tarshish. He bought a ticket and went on board, hoping to escape from the Lord by sailing to Tarshish. But the Lord hurled a powerful wind over the sea, causing a violent storm that threatened to break the ship apart. Fearing for their lives, the desperate sailors shouted to their gods for help and threw the cargo overboard to lighten the ship. But all this time, Jonah was sound asleep down in the hold. So the captain went down after him. How can you sleep at a time like this? He shouted. Get up and pray to your God. Maybe he will pay attention to us and spare our lives. Then the crew cast lots to see which of them had offended the gods that caused the terrible storm. When they did this, the lots identified Jonah as the culprit. "Why has this awful storm come down on us?" they demanded. "Who are you? What is your line of work? What country are you from? What is your nationality?" Jonah answered, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." The sailors were terrified when they heard this, for he had already told them he was running away from the Lord. "Oh, why did you do it?" they'd groaned. And since the storm was getting worse all the time, they asked him, "What should we do? What should we do to you to stop this storm?" "Throw me into the sea," he said, "and it will become calm again. I know that this terrible storm is all my fault." Instead, the sailors rowed even harder to get the ship to the land. But the stormy sea was too violent for them, and they couldn't make it. Then they cried out to the Lord, Jonah's God. "O Lord," they pleaded, "don't make us die for this man's sin, and don't hold us responsible for his death. O Lord, you have sent the storm upon him for your own good reasons." Then the sailors picked Jonah up and threw him into the raging sea, and the storm stopped at once. The sailors were awestruck by the Lord's great power, and they offered him a sacrifice and vowed to serve him. Now the Lord had arranged for a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from inside the fish. Then the Lord ordered the fish to spit Jonah out onto the beach. The Lord spoke to Jonah a second time, "Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh and deliver the message I have given you." This time Jonah obeyed the Lord's command and went to Nineveh, a city so large that it took 3 days to see it all. On the day Jonah entered the city, he shouted to the crowds, 40 days from now, Nineveh will be destroyed." The people of Nineveh believed God's message, and from the greatest to the least, they declared a fast and put on burlap to show their sorrow. When the king of Nineveh heard what Jonah was saying, he stepped down from his throne, took off his royal robes. He dressed himself in burlap and sat on a heap of ashes. When God saw what they had done and how they had put a stop to their evil ways, he changed his mind and did not carry out the destruction he had threatened. This change of plans greatly upset Jonah, and he became very angry. So he complained to the Lord about it. "Didn't I say before I left home that you would do this, Lord? That is why I ran away to Tarshish. I knew that you are a merciful and compassionate God, slow to get angry and filled with unfailing love. You are eager to turn back from destroying people. Just kill me now, Lord. I'd rather be dead than alive if what I predicted will not happen." The Lord replied, "Is it right for you to be angry about this?" Then Jonah went out to the east side of the city and made a shelter to sit under as he waited to see what would happen to the city. And the Lord God arranged for a leafy plant to grow there, and soon it spread its broad leaves over Jonah's head, shading him from the sun. This eased his discomfort, and Jonah was very grateful for the plant. But God also arranged for a worm. The next morning at dawn, the worm ate through the stem of the plant so that it withered away. And as the sun grew hot, God arranged for a scorching east wind to blow on Jonah. The sun beat down on his head until he grew faint and wished to die. "Death is certainly better than living like this," he exclaimed. Then God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry because the plant died?" "Yes," Jonah retorted, "even angry enough to die." The Lord said, "You feel sorry about the plant, though you did nothing to put it there. It came quickly and died quickly. But Nineveh has more than 120,000 people living in spiritual darkness, not to mention all the animals. Shouldn't I feel sorry for such a great city?" What a story. Let's get right into it. We're going to talk about Jonah at sea and on land. And let's talk about how off course he really is. Chapters 1 and 2 are the part of the story where Jonah is at sea. And this is the part of the story that we tend to focus on the most, I think, especially with children. When we tell the story to them, we tend to focus on chapters 1 and 2 primarily. I know it's the part of the story that I learned as a kid mostly, and chapters 3 and 4 were either just omitted or kind of quickly glossed over. If there's a lot to learn from those chapters that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, but for now, let's focus on 1 and 2. He's a really fascinating character, Jonah, for a whole lot of reasons, not least of which is that he ended up getting spit out of a big fish. I mean, that in and of itself is reason enough to stop and read the story and think about it for a little while. But how he got there, what brought him to that moment, to that low point in his life, and we can really call it a low point both physically as he goes way down in the ocean, but also low spiritually. What happened to get him there is also really fascinating. He got there because of his rejection to follow God. The fact that he was screening God's calls, as we were talking about just a few minutes ago. Because, of course, the Lord had told Jonah to go to Nineveh, the great capital city of Assyria. So, some context about the Assyrian people, I think, is in order. Just a little bit, if you'll indulge me. The Assyrians were known throughout the region, throughout the known world at that time, for their ruthlessness and their mercilessness. These were the kind of people that you did not want to go to if you were an outsider. These are the kind of people that killed you just for showing up. They had a nasty habit of conquering all the land that they could around them. And we even see them conquer the northern kingdom of Israel in its time. When they did so, when they went on their conquering campaigns, they had a nasty habit of killing everybody that they didn't want to enslave. So you either ended up one of two ways, being enslaved to them or being killed. On top of that, we have descriptions in Scripture itself and from outside of Scripture as well, telling us of the ways that the Assyrians would march the people that they had conquered, those that they enslaved, back to their homeland. They did it by, and pardon the little bit of graphic description here, by putting hooks in noses, and only hooks and noses. And they would hook one person to the next, to the next, to the next. So you can imagine what would happen if somebody stumbled and fell as they marched them day and night. Yeah. Ruthless and merciless people know how to kill, know how to torture, know how to make your life miserable. Those are the people that God says to Jonah, I'd like for you to go see them. I would like for you to go to their capital city, not just any city. Don't start out in the suburbs and work your way to the inner city. I want you to go to the heart of their kingdom and speak to them about me. Do you suppose Jonah might have been just a little bit afraid? There might have been a little bit of fear that played into his screening God's call. I think probably so. Fear that his presence in Nineveh would lead to his capture and even his death, I think. And so he fled, which is honestly usually not the best choice when it comes to, what you do when God says something to you, but he fled all the same. And he found himself on a boat. He found himself on a boat out at sea. So a big storm arises because of the Lord. And all the people on the boat are being tossed about. And now they're afraid because what was originally supposed to be easy sailing, smooth sailing from one port to the next, instead, now they're being tossed about and afraid for their own lives. Ultimately, they toss him overboard in order to save themselves. One thing I hadn't thought about with this story until this time reading it, at least I don't remember thinking about it previously, is how much in need of these sort of people we really are in our lives. Now look, I'm not going to make them out to be heroes or saints or anything like that, but go with me here for just a moment. These are people willing to throw Jonah overboard so that he can learn the lesson, the valuable lesson that he needs to learn. I remember when I wanted to learn to swim. Anybody else remember that time in your life when you wanted to learn to swim? I remember being so scared. I was standing on the edge of the pool, wanting to jump in, but also not wanting to jump in. And I remember my dad coming a little bit closer to make me feel a little more safe. And just as I'm about to jump, He backed up, but I was already on my way. I'm thinking, great, fantastic, right? All in a split moment. But of course, what did my dad know that I didn't? That he was ultimately going to be there for me, but that I needed to jump in to learn. That part of the lesson is jumping into the deep end. For Jonah, part of the lesson is he needs to get thrown overboard in this moment. And he needed people there to throw him overboard. I don't think Jonah, in fact, we see it in the story. If Jonah were truly ready to change his mind at this time, why not jump overboard on his own? Why does he request that they toss him overboard? Because he needs them. He needs people like that in his life to say, yeah, this is what you need right now. Let's go. As I got to thinking about it, I need people like that in my life too. If the only people we have in our lives, if the only people we surround ourselves with are people that cover for us, people that lie for us, people that don't let us take responsibility for our actions, people that, don't let us sink or swim at times due to our sin and stupidity, then we need to get people in our lives who are willing to throw us overboard, who are willing to let us take responsibility for our lives, and not only willing, but demand it of us. Demand that we stand and take responsibility for our actions. It's vitally important that we have people like that. People who are willing to throw us overboard so that we can learn. Good friends, true family, are those kind of people. Because they know you're going to get stronger. They know you're going to get better if this can happen to you. It's the people who are willing to let you hit rock bottom that are your true friends, not the ones who are always willing to bail you out. Jonah needed people to throw him overboard. Otherwise, he could have done it himself, but he was unwilling. I think we need people like that in our lives as well. And so we see Jonah way off course in chapters 1 and 2, right? He goes so off course that he goes way deep down with this big fish. Of course, he ended up as half-digested food, which is not the way you want to end up, but it's what he needed. The hard truth of the story, though, is that you'd think at a moment like this, okay, he's ready to get back on course. But the truth is, in chapters 3 and 4, he's still off course. And perhaps even more off course than he was in chapters 1 and 2. So let's look at chapters 3 and 4 for a moment. Though he had physically turned around and begun to go the way that God wanted him to, going in the literal direction God had asked, spiritually, Jonah is still way off course. He is still adrift, being tossed about by stormy seas. If Jonah's story ended with chapter 3, what I've just stated sounds like lunacy. But it doesn't end with chapter 3. It continues into chapter 4. You see, at the end of chapter 3, what happens? It's a lot of rejoicing, right? Or at least from the people of Nineveh. They're happy. They're excited because God is now not going to bring about this destruction that He had said He was going to. They'd gone so far as to declare a fast and put on this rough clothing, burlap. And we see the king in a heap of ashes. And these were all ancient Near Eastern ways of expressing sorrow and grief in these sorts of moments. This is real, actual repentance. Like the people are actually turning away from their sin and turning toward God. So they're happy. Chapter 3 ends in happiness and rejoicing. It doesn't sound like they're just faking it to get by. And so we might expect the story to end this way. Happily. Right? That's what we want our stories to end with, a happy ending. That's why everybody loves Disney stories. Because they end with happy endings. We all love a good Disney story. You do, I do, it's okay. That's not how the story ends. Because there's a chapter 4. There's a chapter 4. You'd expect, after this heartfelt conviction that the people experience, we'd probably expect, after reading the Old Testament, and especially the book of Judges, for there to be some description of the people quickly falling away, right? They have this great moment of conviction, and then all of a sudden they're right back doing what they've always done. That's the description we get of the nation of Israel over and over again, but that's not what we get of the Assyrians here in Nineveh. That's what I expect from them, but that's not what happens. And it's not the people of Nineveh as we might expect. See, the story goes on. Jonah's done his job. You'd expect chapter 4 to be about the Ninevites, that they're going to quickly fall away after so quickly turning toward God. That's not what chapter 4 teaches us. The Ninevites aren't the main part of chapter 4. Jonah is. And so we come to the crux, the pinnacle of just how off course Jonah really is. You see, in verse 2 of chapter 4, he rightly describes the Lord. Let's look at that one more time. I want to read that again, in case you missed it the first time. Didn't I say before I left home that you would do this, Lord? That is why I ran away to Tarshish. I knew. Here's what he knows about the Lord. I knew that you are a merciful and compassionate God, slow to get angry and filled with unfailing love. You are eager to turn back from destroying people. Now, in any normal sermon context, that's the highlight of the sermon right there. That's the meat, right? That's where you really dig in and you talk about just how amazing the Lord is. But Jonah's describing God ironically. He believes this about God. He just doesn't like that he believes this about God. And therein lies just how far off course Jonah truly is. Jonah wants the Lord to be vengeful. Jonah doesn't want the Lord to be merciful and loving. He wants God to be full of anger. He wants God to lash out in anger and destroy all of Nineveh. Jonah would rather be dead, as he tells us, than to see God be merciful to these people. It's a really striking comment. I mean, when you read it, it just floors you, or it did me once again this week as I read it. And here's the really sad part. Here's the really, really disturbing part, because we read this and we go, I'm glad I'm not like that. But the truth is, I think we're not very far off. I hear a lot of Christians saying some really awful and nasty things about other people. I see some Christians posting some really awful and nasty things about other people. And frankly, I'm fed up. I am tired of us acting self-righteous. I'm tired of us coming to church and praising God for His amazing love and unfailing kindness and mercy. And then in our lives, wanting the worst for our enemies. Because that's who we are. We are Jonah right now in our lives. Democrat, Republican, American versus Mexicans, and whoever else you want to throw in the bunch. We are Jonah in this moment. Because we have let our demons get the best of us. We have let Satan take a stronghold, a foothold into our very hearts. And so we are Jonah. We are as spiritually off course as he was because of our hatred and our anger toward other people. And I am so tired of seeing it. It is so frustrating. It is incredibly frustrating to see Christians, people that I know to be good people, so off course. I believe in a merciful God. Not only do I believe in it, I want a merciful God. The people who hate me, I want them to experience God's mercy. The people who disagree with me, I want them to experience God's kindness. I don't see that from a lot of Christians right now. I'm not calling anybody in here out in particular. But we as God's people, if you see it, it's time to call it out. It's time to tell. Let me put it this way. It's time to be the people that are willing to throw some Christians overboard right now. It's time for us to stand up and say, the way that you're treating that person just because they disagree with you politically, it's time to stop that. It's time to quit demonizing them and hating them just because you disagree with them. We look at Jonah's failure and we think, that could never be me. I could never run away from God. And yet that's exactly what we're doing. Because we are failing to follow some most fundamental teaching. That God loves everyone and wants everyone to experience that love. And so we should want everyone to experience that love as well. Jonah is way off course spiritually. And unfortunately, what's really sad is we don't get any closure to Jonah's story. Right? The way it ends, and we're going to talk about the ending here in just a moment. The way it ends leaves you hanging. What happened to Jonah? And I've created a bunch of... You ever heard of fan fiction? You ever do that? You're a fan of some movie or TV show or book series or something, and so fan fiction gets created where these people make up these other stories that go along with the people in the story. I've made up some fan fiction in my own head about Jonah. It's really not very good because I don't like Jonah. I don't really think he's a good person. So it's not the best fan fiction for him. I want some closure to his story. Like, this is one of those stories that, again, when I get to heaven, I want to ask, how did this end? Where did he go from here? Did he go home in disgrace, as I imagine? Did he go home living out his days in disgrace? Did he change his ways? Was he convinced by what God says here? I don't know, but I want to know. Because the way that this little book ends is so powerful. Verses 10 and 11, the way that they close out the story really highlight just how off course Jonah is, once again. I think God really punches Jonah in the gut here. I mean, it's a spiritual punch, but it's a punch nonetheless. God says to him, you feel sorry about the plant. You're angry about this plant dying off. But you're not concerned about the 120,000 people that live in this city that I chose to be merciful toward. The whole city of Nineveh is living in spiritual darkness. Jonah doesn't have any concern about that. The literal Hebrew phrase in verse 11 is not spiritual darkness, though I think it's a really good interpretation of the literal Hebrew phrase, which is that they don't know their left hand from their right hand. In other words, they're lost, right? It's a Hebrew idiom for somebody being lost. And what kind of lostness is God talking about here? Spiritual lostness. And then, as I said, Jonah's story just abruptly ends. We get nothing more about him and his misadventures. No further tales. As far as we know, he drops off the face of the earth. Again, I wonder how his life continued beyond this. Did he learn his lesson? Will we learn his lesson? Because, see, ultimately, it's not about Jonah. He's dead and gone. Whether he learned his lesson or not, ultimately isn't of consequence. Will we learn the lesson that he was supposed to? Hopefully, we read the story of Jonah and don't make the same mistakes that he did. It's time for us to stop screening God's calls. It's It's time for us to stop ignoring the Lord. It's time for us to actually look at other human beings as though they're made in the image of God. And that their value, their worth, is not in the political party that they affiliate with. It's not in the church that they go to. It's not in the religion that they worship. Their value is in the fact that they are made by God. And so right off the bat, there's a person made in the image of God. And I ought to treat them as such, even if they hate me, even if they consider me an enemy. I have to pray for them and love them. When are we going to start doing that again? When are we going to start talking about that again as Christians? Instead of getting riled up and wanting to fight all the time with people. I guess I'm just tired of the fighting. To close out today, a couple of things to think about. First, when you go off course spiritually, how do you redirect back toward God? Or how do you get redirected back toward God? What do you do in your own life to redirect? Is it through prayer, reading, talking to somebody, sharing with somebody what's going on? What do you need to do now if you're off course spiritually to get redirected back to God? And then the last thing, do you have someone in your life willing to toss you overboard? If not, you need to get somebody. You need to make friends with somebody who's willing to throw you overboard so that you can learn what you need to learn. On the flip side, you need to be that for somebody else. You need to be the kind of person that's willing to throw someone overboard to learn the lesson. And in throwing them overboard, it doesn't mean that you can't help them after that. Tossing somebody overboard doesn't mean you're tossing them aside always and forever. It just means that you're willing to let them hurt a little bit because you know it's going to do them some good. The same as we do for raising children and grandchildren. That's what we have to do for each other. That's what being a real family is. So, of course, that brings us to our family time. A time where we get to do that for each other. Where we get to support each other, pray for each other. And support doesn't mean that you've done everything right. Sometimes it means that what we need to pray for is sin in your life or something that you're struggling with. That's what we do as a family. We support each other in that way. But it could be something else. Maybe something that you are excited about this morning that you want to share with our family. That's what this family time is about. And so if you have any of those needs that you want to let us know about, please don't waste this moment this morning to share, because we truly want to be a family for you that surrounds you and supports you. So let us know what those things are as we stand.